The great hall of the alien High Council was filled with silence so heavy that even the torches burning along the stone walls seemed afraid to crackle. At the center stood the princess, tall, proud, and unbending. Her long hair shimmered under the golden lights, her sharp eyes scanning the faces of the council members who stared back at her with judgment. She had broken the ancient laws. She had defied their traditions, and for that they would make her pay. The eldest of the council, cloaked in silver, rose slowly from his throne. His voice echoed like thunder across the hall. For your arrogance and disobedience, you must face a punishment that will remind every being of this empire that even royalty cannot stand above our law. His words cut through the air like a blade. The princess stood motionless, her hands clenched tight, her pride refusing to show fear. Yet deep inside, her heart pounded like a war drum. The council chamber was crowded. Nobles, warriors, and citizens from across the empire had gathered to witness this moment. Their whispers filled the shadows. What fate will she face? Will they exile her? Will they strip her of her title? None of them expected what came next. The old counselor raised his hand, and the room fell silent. You will be bound to a human. Gasps erupted across the chamber. Shock spread like wildfire, a punishment so cruel, so humiliating, that even her enemies flinched at the words. In their proud alien culture, humans were seen as fragile, weak, barely worthy of notice. To be tied to one was worse than chains. It was disgrace. The princess's eyes widened for only a heartbeat before narrowing again. She would not show weakness, not here, not in front of them. You cannot force this upon me, she said coldly, her voice steady though her chest burned with rage. You have no choice, another council member replied. This is your sentence, a bond to a human mate, a punishment that will remind you and all who watch that pride has its cost. The crowd murmured louder now, their voices sharp with mockery. Some smiled, pleased to see the proud princess fall. Others shook their heads, pity in their eyes, but none dared to speak against the council's decree. The great doors of the hall creaked open and footsteps echoed against the stone. A man entered, simple in appearance, dressed in plain clothing, no armor, no weapon. His dark eyes swept across the hall calmly as if he did not notice the stares of hundreds pressing down upon him. He was human. The punishment had already been chosen. The princess's heart twisted with fury. This fragile creature is to be my mate? This is my curse? She wanted to spit, to shout, to tear the chains of law from her shoulders. But instead she stood frozen, her rage a storm beneath her calm face. The man walked slowly until he stood before her. The council watched closely, waiting for him to bow, to kneel, to show his submission, as was expected. But he did not kneel. He did not lower his gaze. Instead, he looked directly into the princess's eyes. His stare was calm, steady, almost defiant. The hall seemed to hold its breath. The princess felt a chill run down her spine. This human, why was he not afraid? Every other being in this empire lowered their heads in her presence. Every warrior, every noble, every servant. But this human stood as if her rank, her power, her fury meant nothing. Do you understand your role? One of the counselors demanded. His voice sharp, the man nodded once. I understand. His tone was even, unshaken. And you accept this bond? I accept. The words were simple yet heavy. The princess felt her fists tighten. Rage burned inside her chest. She wanted to shout at him, to curse him, to tear him from this hall and send him back to whatever fragile world he had crawled from. Instead, she stared into his calm eyes, trying to break through his silence, to find weakness. But all she found was an unsettling steadiness. The council struck their staffs against the floor, sealing the judgment. The sound echoed like thunderclaps. It is done. From this day forth, the princess is bound to a human mate. This is her punishment, her shame, and her reminder of humility. The crowd erupted again. Some laughed, their voices cruel and sharp. Others whispered with disbelief. The princess stood tall, refusing to show the storm raging within her. She would not let them see her break. She turned her eyes toward the human one last time, her voice cold as ice. "You are nothing to me," she hissed, but he did not flinch, he did not look away. His gaze met hers, steady and unshaken, and in that moment something strange stirred inside her, a flicker of confusion, a shadow of doubt. The council dismissed them, and the great doors began to close behind them. As they walked out side by side, the princess kept her chin high, her pride a shield, yet every step burned with anger and shame. Her heart repeated the words over and over. A human mate. My punishment. My curse. But in the silence of her thoughts, another voice whispered, faint and strange. Then why did he not bow? Why did his eyes feel like fire? The hall faded behind them, but the question remained, haunting her as she walked beside the human who would change everything. The chambers given to the princess and her new human mate were large and richly decorated, carved with the ancient patterns of her people. Yet to her the space felt like a cage. Every time she looked at him, she felt the sting of her punishment burn deeper. He moved quietly, placing a small bag of his belongings near the corner, his calm eyes scanning the room as if he had stepped into the lair of a beast. The princess folded her arms across her chest, her voice sharp. Do not think this changes anything. You may live here, but you are not my equal. You are not my mate. You are nothing more than a burden chained to my side. The human said nothing. He only gave a small nod, as if he had expected her hatred, as if her words were not knives but simple wind brushing against him. He turned away and began unpacking. That silence made her furious. She wanted him to fight, to argue, to prove himself weak so she could laugh at him. But his calmness was like stone, unyielding, unmoving. The days that followed were filled with her cruelty. She spoke to him in cold commands, treating him as though he were a servant. She mocked his fragile frame, his lack of strength compared to her kind. She made sure everyone around them knew he was her punishment, her shame. Yet the human did not react the way she hoped. He rose early each morning, cooking simple meals with steady hands. When something in the chamber broke, he fixed it without complaint. When she hurled insults at him, he answered with silence or with words so calm they left her unsettled. One evening she found him sitting by the window, looking out at the alien city lights. "Why do you not fight back?" she demanded, her voice sharp with frustration. "Why do you not shout, not curse me, not show anger? Are you truly so weak?" He turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting hers. "Because anger is easy. Respect is harder." His voice was quiet, but each word was clear, unshaken. The princess froze. She wanted to laugh at him, to call his words foolish. But the way he said them, the calmness in his voice left her tongue heavy. She turned away quickly, hiding the unease that grew in her chest. In the council halls, whispers followed her everywhere. Nobles smirked. Warriors chuckled behind her back. Servants stared with pity. The princess with the human mate. Their voices stabbed her pride with every step. She blamed him, the fragile creature walking silently at her side. Yet he bore the stares and the whispers with a strength she could not explain. Late at night, she often watched him from the corner of her eye. When he thought she was asleep, he would sit by the fire, lost in thought, his face calm, almost peaceful. There was no fear in his eyes, no shame, only a quiet strength she did not understand. One night, unable to hold her anger, she stood before him. "Do you not realize you are a punishment? Do you not see you are my curse?" Her voice cracked with the weight of her fury. The human looked up at her, his expression steady. "Perhaps I am your punishment, but what I become is not decided by the council, it is decided by us." His words struck her like a blow she did not expect. She turned away, her chest tight with emotions she did not want to name. Days turned to weeks, and though she tried to keep her walls high, cracks began to appear. When she stumbled during training, he was there to steady her without a word. When she returned late at night, exhausted and bruised, she found food waiting for her. Warm and simple, he never boasted. He never reminded her of his actions. He simply lived as though he belonged beside her. It infuriated her. It unsettled her. It left her questioning things she had never questioned before. One evening, as rain hammered against the windows, she found herself staring at him as he repaired a broken lantern. His hands moved with patience, his eyes focused, his breathing calm. Something about the sight made her heart beat differently, a rhythm she could not control. She shook her head, whispering to herself, "No, this is nothing. He is nothing." But even as she spoke, she knew the lie in her words. And in the quiet of that stormy night, for the first time, the princess felt fear. Not of her punishment, not of the council, but of the possibility that her heart was no longer entirely her own. The nights grew longer, and with them came silence so heavy it pressed against the princess's chest. She told herself she hated him, that every day with the human was nothing more than chains binding her honor. Yet she could not deny what her eyes saw, what her heart refused to ignore. One night she awoke from a dream that left her shaking. In the dream, the council had cast her into darkness, surrounded by enemies, stripped of her crown. She reached for her blade, but it vanished in her hands. Fear crawled through her veins, and for the first time in her life she felt helpless. She jolted awake, her breath ragged, her hands trembling, and there he was, the human, sitting quietly by the fire, his eyes heavy with fatigue yet alert as though he had been watching over her the entire night. Without a word, he stood, walked to her side, and placed a blanket around her shoulders. His touch was light, gentle, steady. He said nothing, no mocking, no questions, no demands. Only silence, calm and sure. For a moment the princess did not move. Her pride screamed at her to push him away, to tear the blanket from her shoulders. But something inside her refused. She sat there, wrapped in warmth not only from the fabric but from the strange comfort in his presence. When morning came, she carried the image of that moment in her mind. It unsettled her more than any battle ever had. The days that followed only deepened the cracks in her defenses. She began noticing things she had ignored before. When he walked beside her in the streets, he bore the mocking stares of her people without complaint. When merchants whispered insults about her punishment, he never answered them, but his steady gaze silenced their laughter. When guards spat the word human like poison, he did not shrink. Instead, he stood taller, as if daring them to say more. One evening after training, the princess stumbled, her knees weak from exhaustion. She expected him to watch her fall. Instead, he caught her arm, steadying her with surprising strength. His eyes did not mock her. They did not pity her. They only held her firmly until she found her balance again. Then he released her hand and stepped back as though nothing had happened. That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts restless. Why does he not take pride in helping me? Why does he not remind me of my weakness? She wanted to hate him for it, but she could not. The turning point came on a cold evening when the wind howled through the halls of their chamber. She returned from a meeting with the council, her body stiff with rage. They had mocked her openly, using her bond with the human as a weapon against her pride. Every word had cut like a blade. She stormed into the chamber, her chest burning, her teeth clenched. The human looked up from the table where he had been mending a torn cloak. His calm eyes met hers, and for once, she did not throw her anger at him. Instead, her voice cracked and she whispered, "They laugh at me. They see me as broken." He set the cloak aside and stood slowly. "Then let them laugh." His tone was even, quiet, yet it carried weight. She turned to him, her anger flaring. "You do not understand. My honor, my people's respect, it is all I have." He stepped closer, his gaze never wavering. Respect earned through fear can vanish, but respect earned through strength of heart can never be taken. His words struck her deeply. She wanted to argue, to push back, but no words came. Her throat tightened, her chest heavy with emotions she could not name. For the first time, she turned her eyes away from him, not from pride but from something she was afraid to admit. That night she found herself staring at him again as he sat by the fire. The flames lit his face, casting shadows across his calm expression. She studied him in silence, the steady rise and fall of his chest, the way his eyes seemed lost in thought yet always aware of his surroundings, the quiet strength he carried, without boasting. Her heart beat faster. She clenched her fists, whispering to herself, "No, this cannot be. He is human. He is my curse." But no matter how many times she repeated the words, the truth grew louder inside her. She was beginning to see him not as a punishment, but as something else. The thought terrified her, and yet when she finally closed her eyes that night, it was not her nightmares that haunted her. It was the memory of his calm eyes, steady and unyielding, as though they had the power to break the chains around her heart. The first signs of trouble came with the sound of alarms. The city that stretched below their chambers erupted in chaos as fires lit the sky. Enemy ships had pierced the outer defenses, and now the streets were filled with screams and the clash of steel. The princess rushed to the balcony, her sharp eyes scanning the skyline. Her enemies, rivals of her family, had come to destroy her bloodline once and for all. She felt her chest burn with fury. "They dare attack me here?" she hissed. Her hand reached for her blade, the weapon gleaming as she pulled it free. She was ready to fight, ready to die with honor. But then she heard movement behind her. The human stood in the doorway, unarmed, his eyes calm but alert. "We have to move," he said firmly. "They'll come for you first." The princess turned, anger flashing in her eyes. "Do not speak as though you know the ways of war. You are no warrior. Stay out of my path." But before she could storm past him, the sound of crashing doors filled the halls. Armored assassins poured into the chamber, their eyes locked on her. Her guards faltered, some cut down instantly. The princess raised her blade, ready to fight, but what happened next left her breathless. The human moved. With no armor, no weapons, nothing but his bare hands, he leapt into the fray. He grabbed the closest attacker by the wrist, twisting the blade free with shocking precision. Before the alien could react, the human struck with speed born of instinct, driving the enemy back. Another came at him, and though the human was wounded by a slash across his arm, he did not stop. He fought with the kind of determination that came not from training, but from something far deeper. The princess stood frozen for a moment. She had always seen him as fragile, weak, powerless. But here he was, standing between her and death, his body moving like fire, his will unshaken. "Get back," he shouted to her as two more attackers closed in. Her pride screamed at her to resist, to tell him she needed no protection. But her heart betrayed her, tightening at the sight of him bleeding, fighting, refusing to give ground. She joined the battle, her blade cutting through the assassins with lethal grace. Together they fought, princess and human, punishment and protector. The chamber echoed with steel, with cries of pain, with the thunder of survival. When the last enemy fell, silence returned, broken only by the sound of the human's ragged breathing. He stood trembling, his arm bleeding freely, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion. But he was still on his feet, still between her and danger. The princess lowered her blade slowly, her eyes locked on him. She had no words. For the first time, she saw him not as a punishment, not as a curse, but as a shield. He staggered and she rushed forward without thinking. Her hands caught him before he could fall, her heart pounding with something she could not name. "Why?" she whispered, fiercely. "Why would you risk yourself for me?" His eyes met hers, still calm even as pain tightened his face. "Because your life matters more than mine." Her breath caught in her throat. No warrior of her people had ever spoken to her that way. No one had ever put her life above their own without being ordered, without expecting reward. But this human, he had done it freely. She pressed her hand to his wound, trying to stop the bleeding, her chest tight with emotions she had spent weeks denying. She had mocked him, cursed him, treated him as less than nothing. And yet, he had chosen to stand before death for her sake. For the first time in her life, the princess felt her pride shatter. And in its place grew something terrifying, something she did not want to admit. She felt fear, not of him, not of the council, not of her enemies, but of the truth awakening inside her heart. She whispered again, softer this time. "Why would you do this?" His answer came with a weak smile. "Because I am not your curse. I am your choice." The words struck her deeper than any blade ever could. She held him tighter, refusing to let him fall, refusing to let him slip into the darkness. In that moment, the thought became clear, undeniable. Perhaps the council had meant this bond as punishment, but in reality, they had given her something far more powerful. They had given her salvation. The battle left the chamber scarred. Smoke lingered in the air, broken weapons littered the floor, and the sound of distant fighting echoed through the city. But in the center of the ruin stood the princess, kneeling beside the human, her hands pressed against his bleeding wound. Her proud face, once a mask of defiance, was now streaked with tears she could no longer hide. "Stay awake," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You will not die here, not like this." The human opened his eyes slowly, his breathing shallow but steady. "I am not afraid." His calm words broke her even more. She had called him weak, fragile, unworthy. Yet when death came, he had stood where her own warriors had fallen. He had bled for her. He had fought for her. He had shielded her with a courage her people could never understand. She clenched his hand tightly, her pride shattered. "I was wrong," she whispered fiercely. "You are not my curse." For the first time, her voice softened as she spoke his name. "You are my salvation." Hours passed before the city calmed, before her enemies retreated into the shadows once more. But in her heart, the true battle was already over. No decree of the council, no whisper of mockery, no shadow of shame could undo what she now knew. The punishment that was meant to break her had given her something stronger than honor, something deeper than pride. That night, in the quiet of their chamber, she sat by his side as he rested. The firelight danced across his face, highlighting the scars left by his bravery. She found herself staring, not with disdain, but with wonder. His strength had not been born of power or bloodline. It had come from loyalty, from the unshakable choice to protect her even when he had no reason to. When he stirred awake, his eyes met hers. For the first time, she did not turn away. "Why did you not bow to me that day in the council hall?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly, his voice hoarse. "Because I did not see a princess to fear. I saw someone worth standing beside." Her chest tightened at his words. She had never heard anything so simple yet so powerful. It was not her crown, her bloodline, or her power that he saw. It was her. Days later, the council summoned her. The chamber was filled again with whispers, mocking smiles, and eyes eager to see her shame. But when she entered, she did not walk alone. At her side walked the human, his wounds bound but his steps strong. The council elder raised a brow. "You still carry your punishment at your side?" he asked with a cruel smile. The princess raised her chin, her voice steady, strong. "No, I do not carry a punishment, I walk with my mate." Gasps filled the chamber. The whispers turned to stunned silence. The counselors exchanged looks, their plan unraveling before their eyes. The punishment meant to break her pride had instead become the foundation of something stronger. She reached for the human's hand, lacing her fingers with his. For the first time, she did not care who saw. "You thought to curse me," she said to the council, her voice echoing across the hall. "But you gave me a gift. You gave me someone who taught me strength is not in bloodline, nor in fear, but in the courage of the heart." The human stood silent beside her, his presence calm but unshaken, as though he had always belonged there. The chamber erupted in shouts and arguments, but none of it mattered. The princess had made her choice, and for the first time, it was not the council's voice that ruled her fate. It was her own. That night, as they returned to their chamber, the princess sat beside the fire with him. She placed her hand over his, her eyes steady. "From the day they bound us together, I swore I would never accept you. I swore you were my curse, but you touched something inside me I did not know existed. You made me see myself in a way I never had before. For that, I cannot hate you. I can only thank you." He looked at her, his calm gaze softening. "Then thank me not with words, thank me with truth. What do you feel now?" The princess's lips trembled, but she did not look away. Her walls had fallen, her pride broken, and what remained was only truth. "I feel free. Because with you I'm not a prisoner of the council, not a prisoner of pride. With you I am myself." The human reached out, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Then you were never cursed." She leaned closer, her forehead resting against his, her heart finally surrendering. "No," she whispered. "I was never cursed. I was saved." And in the silence of that moment, with the fire crackling and the shadows fading, the bond that had begun as punishment became something greater, something unbreakable. From that day forward, they did not walk as curse and prisoner. They walked as partners, as equals, as two souls bound not by decree but by choice. And together they faced the galaxy, not with fear or shame, but with the strength of a love that no council, no enemy, no empire could ever destroy.